Now I invite Dr. Farhan Mujahid Chak, who is an Associate Professor of Political Science at the Gulf Studies Graduate Program, Qatar University. He has worked at the United Nations, the Canadian Parliament, and Georgetown University. His research interests include Islam and politics, political theory, secularism, peace and conflict studies, post-colonialism, epistemology, and leadership. Over to you, Dr. Farhan Mujahid Chak.
Thank you very much, Abdul Wahid Saab. And first, I'd like to thank and express my appreciation and gratitude to His Excellency Raza Tarar Saab. He's always been at the forefront and diligently working very quietly over a long period of time, and his reputation precedes him. It was a pleasure to listen to His Excellency President Masood Khan Saab, and I always learn from him every time he speaks, no matter how many times I hear him speak. And I'd like to kind of touch my brief comments on 4 things that were spoken of before, but I'd just like to reiterate and add a few other things that are happening. So first and foremost, I think we need to impress upon everybody that there is no dialogue, and anyone with any kind of precursory knowledge of conflict resolution is that communication, the end of communication, leads only to one alternative, and that is war. So the fact that there's no dialogue, all avenues of communication are closed, and the fact that this is a nuclear zone, that not just Pakistan and India, but China is now involved. And, recently, Mike Pompeo and India, there's a deal has been signed, a military deal has been signed. So this kind of, in another way, ups the ante, so to speak, in the ways and means that America is trying to pressure China, and China in turn is facing these increasing aggressive overtures from India, no doubt because India feels emboldened by its American support, and then how this brings in Kashmir and how this brings in Pakistan. So it's a complex and an increasingly hostile environment, but no communication is very serious. Now, and that leads us, of course, to the potential for a serious global nuclear crisis. And again, as His Excellency had mentioned too, not to sound alarmist, but this is something that is very much in the realm of reality. Another thing I'd like to highlight is the role that Hindutva extremism is playing within India, and how it's a global threat to peace, and how these Hindutva extremists and their ideology is exactly in line with the fascist Nazi ideology. So I think we need to impress upon everyone the connection and the ideological linkages between Nazi Germany and Hindutva India today. And that leads to a demonization, not only of minorities within their country, but also in the occupied territory of Kashmir as well. So when we do touch upon this with our friends and colleagues, I think it's important to highlight that as well. And as was mentioned before, there is absolutely no leadership coming from global multilateral institutions, but we still need to kind of engage with all of them. Write letters, even write letters to the various members of parliament in Canada. We need to impress upon them, and in a very succinct form, because it's also not just the message, it's the messenger and how we present the message. So key basic facts. There have been 18 UN resolutions on Kashmir, 21 in total, but 18 specifically UN Security Council resolutions, 18 of them. And this is the single largest concentration of army personnel in a given area. And this is the first agenda on the UN, the first issue on the UN agenda when the United Nations was created. So I think these talking points and facts need to constantly be out there to kind of counter the false narratives that India has been pushing for so long. The most serious of which is unraveling is the fact that Kashmir is an integral part of India. So what I always point out to all my friends in Canada or wherever I happen to be at that time is that this is UN designated disputed territory. Nobody has the right to claim to own it. And we are very clear that the people will ultimately be the decision makers, and we honor those UN Security Council resolutions that India is signatory to. So I think when we put this in this kind of a pattern, we put this framework forward, there's no wiggle room. There's no way to escape and come forward with a kind of deceitful and deceptive narrative that India has been pushing for a very long time. But what's happened now is that their entire narrative has been collapsing. And they'll try as they must. But on social media, in academia now, the narrative that India has been pushing for so long is unraveling, but we need to continue our efforts to challenge them on these very basic things. And so myself as a Kashmiri, this is something that I've always kind of done, is emphasize the fact that there has been no means or method to allow the people of the disputed territory to express their will. As a matter of fact, the closest expression of their will in 1947 was when they revolted against the tyrannical, illegitimate, non-Kashmiri pseudo-ruler, you could say, of the disputed territory, and kicked him out of Gilgit-Baltistan, out of Azad Kashmir. The expression of those Kashmiris was the clearest indication of what they wanted. But still, just to be consistent and morally sound, I insist that the people have that right to choose. So when I look at these four things, what is India doing now? Well, it's blatant, naked aggression. Under the cover of a global pandemic, a communications blockade, and an internet siege. All the while preaching a peaceful kind of pluralistic, secular message outside to pander to a liberal Western democratic norm, but internally a very aggressive, xenophobic nativism that is the worst form of majoritarianism and riddled with myth and fascist kind of innuendo. So this duplicitous strategy that India is employing is, I think, rightly being uncovered, but we need to push this. I think the success of Pakistan's initiatives, they should be acknowledged, because the overtures that the Indian state has been trying to do back channel or secretly with the Pakistan state is proof that they realize that their narrative is not finding any buyers, and they're just desperate to try to bring Pakistan on board with these false talks about, okay, we'll talk about it in private, but it will not amount to anything. So Pakistan's principled stance of refusing to not have a very clear timetable on how to move forward with talks and include the people of Kashmir has really shut the door to any type of, let's say, appropriation of the talks and denial of the Kashmiri rights. Now, there's two other things that I wanted to talk about briefly to mention what's happened recently in occupied Kashmir, what we refer to as Maqbuza Kashmir, and that Kashmiris from that part are talking about. One, which is how a former stooge or a collaborator of the Indian state against the aspirations of the people has refused to sit in any place or venue in which there's an Indian flag. So this is the big talk amongst and this is Mahbooba Mufti I'm referring to. This is serious. And remember, even Umar Abdullah's father, Farooq Abdullah, even himself, who also has been and is considered a stooge by Kashmiris, he openly said on live Indian TV in an interview with Karan Thapar that Kashmiris hate Indians and they want nothing to do with India. So these are also firsts, that even those who had been previously co-opted by the Indian state for peanuts at the behest of their own people, and which all, occupiers, wherever they are, they find those collaborators, they find those stooges, they give them these false promises, and those people willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly become instruments of oppression against their own people. So they also need to be called out. But that was something that was really, for many people in occupied Kashmir, just another instance of, see, look, even they've left their own kind of minority community and had them jailed as well, of course, as I'm sure many of you know. And the second thing that everybody was talking about, which was really interesting, is what the new laws that have just been passed, as a matter of fact, just today, which is the referred to as the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Order of 2020, which basically allows any Indian citizen anywhere, and even foreigners, by the way, to buy property in Kashmir. Now, this is something that was never done before because only permanent residents had the right to buy property in the region. So because, of course, all of those clauses were removed, Article 370, Article 35A, so this is why I refer to now as just naked, blatant colonization. At first, it was a subtle form of colonization, trying to trick people. No, we're with you and we're secular, but they are not. They're really, secularism outside of the Western societies doesn't function the way it does in a North American or Western European context. It doesn't even work that way in Eastern Europe. So on any scholarly analysis of the formation and the kind of the lived reality of secularism outside its origins, of cultural origins, it doesn't function that way. Caste, especially so deeply ingrained in Indian society, and now this radical fascist Hindutva, it doesn't work there. And we see it blatantly, that everything is up for sale, and a level of corruption and abuse of the laws that are happening today, especially under this government, is unprecedented. So now India knows it can't hold, even financially, paying 1 million soldiers. And then most of, by the way, in occupied Kashmir, most of the 90%, I would say, of the jobs are all coming from the Indian state. They've completely tried over the last 70 years to take away the independence of Kashmir, destroy or limit the apple orchards, destroy the natural economy that links it with Pakistan and Central Asia, destroy the natural economy that linked certain parts of Kashmir even to parts of China. So they've done that in a very clever and a very duplicitous manner to increase dependency. And now what we're seeing is throwing away all the facade and blatantly coming out in this very kind of vicious, unforgiving way. But to be honest, I look at it as all a positive, ultimately positive. It's forcing people to make a choice, that you sit back and you take it, or you have to resist, because it cannot continue now. As was mentioned before, Kashmir is going to disappear. Just think about this. Just imagine the ludicrousness of the initiative to issue fake domiciles, inventing ethnicities, giving it to people from all over. And right now the estimates are almost 1.2 million fake domiciles. I guess they realize that, you know, any eventual UN investigation or multilateral investigation will realize that all of these domiciles have been issued within a certain time frame. They will all be rejected, but nonetheless, the charade must go on, and they keep issuing these fake domiciles to people that are, you see on Indian channels celebrating they're now Kashmiri. It's delusional, but nonetheless, it won't hold. So, and they realize it. So now they're just trying to buy all this land and essentially do what they've talked about in very grotesque terms is the final solution. So we are at that very pivotal, dangerous moment. We need to be ready for it. We need to have a plan for it. And these initiatives that are happening all over the world and on social media and on campuses throughout the world, I think they're fantastic, but even more needs to be done. And that's my closing statement. I just wanted to make those brief comments to everybody. Thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate the time that you guys gave me. Thank you.